Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 5 of Introduction to Astronomy Research 2021. We have a good selection of talks and discussions for you here today. As usual, please feel free to use the chat and ask questions, and we'll get to them as best we can. I hope that all of your past work is going well. Feel free to post plots and discussion questions into Piazza, and we can try to answer your questions there. We're doing our best to keep up with all of your questions, and if you think we missed it, just go ahead and post that again, and we'll keep that discussion going. So today we have a great setup of speakers, great lineup for you, and we're going to talk about curriculum vitae, or academic resumes. We're going to talk about the need for personal research websites, and we're going to talk about imposter syndrome, which is something that affects a lot of researchers, probably everyone at some point in academia, and so it's something to be aware of. And that's how we are making our contribution towards mental health and well-being in this class. And so I'm going to motivate our slides today a little bit before I hand off. Leading the discussions today, we have Jack leading the CV discussion, Faye is going to lead the personal website discussion, and Alex is going to lead the imposter syndrome discussion. And so to motivate a little bit why we're here today, while we've started off with some technical aspects of the class, because we think it's really important for all of you to get up to speed and know what kind of tools are available to you. We also understand that there's a lot of skills that are difficult to teach, technically. And so these are what we call soft skills, and they include the topics we're going to go over today. And the first is curriculum vitae. So this is essentially an academic resume. This is something that you would submit to an academic job in the place of a resume, and it includes all kinds of information that's helpful for people who might be making selections. And most importantly is it's much broader in scope than what a resume holds. And it's not just about that sort of one-page format you might be familiar with. And the reason we're doing this is because the goal of this class is to get all of you one step closer to getting that research position, that research opportunity. Perhaps it's unpaid, perhaps it's paid. But we want to get your foot in the door, and having a good curriculum vitae is going to be really important. And then the next, I'll discuss personal websites as well. And we're hoping that by the end of this course, and the end of this week, in fact, you'll have a curriculum vitae of your own. You'll have your own personal website set up. We're going to give you the tools you need to create one. We're going to walk you through how to do it. And then we're going to put you to the task. And so with that, I will hand off to our first speaker, Jack, to talk about CVs. Jack, take it away.
All right, here we go. Let me get some slides pulled up. And all right, so yeah, we're gonna be talking about CV and what it is, what should be included, what should be excluded, and how to get started on building your own. Just recap, thanks Howard for introducing me again. I'm Jack. You might remember my mentor profile from 2 weeks ago. I'm a fourth-year grad student at UC Irvine. And so this talk will be about those CVs, curriculum vitae, which is Latin for the course of life. So like the course that your life has gone through. And so as Howard said, these are really important for anyone who's in academia or wanting to get into academia. And so let's get into exactly what they are. And as Howard kind of mentioned, the first and foremost thing, a one-sentence description of a CV is that it's your academic resume. It's a relatively short document, and it should pretty succinctly describe, all of your academic accomplishments, goals, achievements, et cetera, things like that. And it should really highlight who you are, what you're interested in, and the things that you've done already in the past, as kind of an advertisement for who you are and what you want to do in the future. And so also kind of as Howard started to describe is, well, what are they used for? Mostly they're used for things like applying for jobs within academia. But also when you apply to grad schools, they might ask you to submit a CV. Definitely when you apply later for postdocs or professorships, research or staff scientist positions, they'll ask you to submit a CV as part of your application for their review. Also, when you're applying for grants and funding, they'll ask you for your CV. And then in some ways, they can also be used as like a long form business card of sorts, in making connections within your field. I mean, people aren't really going out handing out their CVs, but CVs are almost always posted to personal websites, which I'm sure Faye will talk about later. And so if you're researching, institutions that you might want to apply to or work at, you might be on some personal websites of people and reading their CVs and trying to get a sense of what they do and what they're interested in. So in that sense, they're kind of like a business card, although that's not really their primary purpose. And so how are CVs different from resumes? Well, the primary distinction is that a CV is just your academic resume. It's specific to academia. And then the second main difference between them is that a CV is very short. A resume is very short. It's usually cut off at a single page, whereas a CV, there is no page limit. And so they can get quite long, but mostly that comes from like, if you're listing all your publications, that could take a lot of space on many pages. But so your typical CV is a few pages, maybe 3 to 5, somewhere in there. And because they're longer, they don't have this strict single page limit. They should be more comprehensive, and they're intended to be a full picture of who you are. So with that, let's talk a little about how you would format a CV. And I think some of the formatting stuff that I'll talk here will be a little clearer in a second when we look at an example one, but I wanted to kind of lay the groundwork first here. And the primary kind of goal of a CV is that it should be really easy to read, and you should be able to scan it very quickly with your eyes. And so there's a couple, formatting tricks that help accomplish this. The first is that name and contact info should always be right at the top in big lettering. And the idea being that, if you've submitted this as part of a job application, they read through your CV, they say, hey, this person's really great, let's get in contact with them. They always know to go right to the top to get your email address or your phone number, something like that. And then CVs they're broken down into these sections with very clear headers and subsections within those sections, which can be easily distinguished by changing things like font sizes or bolding or underline or italicizing text. All these are tricks that can help really guide the eye and make this document very scannable. So here's an example of a CV that I got from University of Illinois from their website. And this is a pretty standard kind of formatting. Again, the first thing is that name and contact info is right at the top, very large and easy to see, and centered, which makes it especially noticeable to the eye, given that everything else is aligned to the left side of the page. And then on the below that, we see some of these sections that I was talking about. And so let's zoom in on focus in on one of these. Here's one where they're talking about teaching and advising experiences. The section header is larger. The text, the font size is larger. Below that is the position that they held at the time. They were a composition instructor. That's bolded to make it stand out. And then below in italicized text, they've got the employer, which was the research writing program at the University of Illinois. And it's not so important which is bolded or which is italicized or underlined. That's not so important. But what is important is that each one is kind of different than the other. And so it makes this document very easy to then scan and read and get the relevant information, as long as you're consistent across the whole document. The last thing, though, is also we've included the dates of when this person was a composition instructor over here on the right. Also dates of when they earned their degrees, just kind of giving a timeline of their education. And we put those off to the right just because there's a lot of kind of dead space over on the right side, which we can fill with this information very easily. And so as someone scrolls through this document, they can kind of get a sense for not only what you've done, but when you've done it in relation to everything else. So they can see, of course, you get a bachelor's first and then a master's and then a PhD, and that's reflected in the timeline, or it would be if they were not placeholder X values. But when you start listing a bunch of positions and jobs that you've held, they can get a good sense of where you started and how you progressed through your career. So that's an example, but let's talk about what your CV shouldn't be. So, what you should include in your CV. And so there's not really one right way or wrong way to do this. There's no standard way to do this, but there are kind of more commonly accepted ways to do it. The thing is that your CV, it should be personalized, but not too personal. And what I mean by that is it should represent you and who you are and your academic life and academic interests, but not your personal life and your personal interests. And so there are a few sections that almost everyone has in their CV. And I figured we'd start with those. Let me list those out here on the next slide. So nearly every CV that I've ever seen has had these subsections. Everyone starts with their education. You list all your degrees and certificates from various institutions. If you're a high school student or an undergrad, you might include your high school diploma. But as you progress through academia and you earn higher degrees, you likely will remove your high school degree just because it becomes less relevant. But then you'll list your research experience, what projects you've worked on, who you've worked with, that kind of stuff. This can include things like a summer internship or a summer REU, or if you worked in a national lab for a time on a project, or if you just worked with a professor at your undergrad, worked on a project, that's fair game here. It doesn't have to necessarily be defined as like a job or an internship. It could just be, I worked with this person for a couple months and we generally worked on, this subfield or that subfield, and it completed with, we wrote a paper or we wrote an article, or maybe we didn't find anything that was, could be converted into a paper, but I learned a lot in the process about, XYZ. But next, everyone loves to show off their awards and honors that they've won. This includes things like fellowships and funding like that. Then there's almost always a section on publications. This is the thing that kind of stretches the length of the CVs. Most people will break this down into like two subsections where they'll have first just their first author publications, and then they'll list all other publications where they were like the nth author buried down on a list somewhere. Then you'll definitely want to list things like any talks that you've given at conferences, or maybe you've been invited to speak at a seminar. This also includes things like posters you presented at conferences, or maybe you did a poster at a science fair at your undergrad institution. Next, if you've taught classes or you have a particular interest in teaching, you'll want to include which courses that you've taught and what they covered, definitely. And then for younger students in high school or undergrad, or even early career graduate school, it's a good idea to list kind of relevant coursework that you've taken. So if you're really interested in exoplanets and you've taken an undergrad course in exoplanets, you might list that. Or likewise, if you've taken a volunteer summer course on how to do astronomy research, which had an exoplanet component to it, you might list that on your CV as well as having completed that course. And lastly, a lot of people list their technical skills, and this is mostly things like computer skills and coding languages or software you're familiar with, but it can be things like experimental techniques that you've done in a lab, or machines that in a lab that you're qualified to work with, things like that. Next, there's a bunch of other sections that are common in CVs, but not everyone has these, and this is kind of where it becomes a bit personalized to you. Some people like to have a whole paragraph about what their research interests are, not just like bullet points, but actually, a thought out written paragraph, 2 or 3 sentences. Others might list their observing experience. This is relevant to astronomy, which telescopes or instruments you're trained to work on. And then similar, a lot of physics and astro projects require, supercomputers. And so you might list your relevant experience with those. Then things like languages, I talked about computer languages, but also human languages. If you're fluent in multiple languages, a job employer, they might like to know that information is relevant to the job. Also, people will list references. These are people who in the past have written letters of recommendation for you, and you would hope or want a future employer to reach out to them to get background information on you. And then something I've been seeing a lot more lately is a section on news and media coverage. This would include things like if you wrote a paper and then the New York Times picked it up and wrote an article about it, you'd include it here. Or if an online astronomy blog wrote about your work, you might include it here. Things like that. That's becoming more common. And then lastly, there are things you don't want to include on your CV. And again, this is mostly personal information. So things like your birthday, your citizenship, your personal address, although you will want your professional address. You want to include your, office number at your institution, but not your personal address. You don't want to include any non-academic work experiences. So like, for example, I used to work at a golf course, but that would not go on my CV because it's not relevant. And then things like your personal hobbies and interests, sports teams, clubs, that does not belong on a resume, on a CV. And then lastly, volunteer experience also does not belong on a CV unless it's relevant to academic work. Like, for example, maybe you're, tutoring middle school kids once a week in math. That would be relevant and acceptable to put on a CV. But so now that we've got an idea of what CVs are, how they're formatted, what to include, what not to include, let's do a really quick demo on how to get set up on Overleaf. So last week, we talked about Overleaf. And so hopefully everyone has an account. Let me just get the right page up here. If you don't have an account on Overleaf, I highly recommend that you do that and get set up. So here I did this earlier. I got all set up, but I want to show you how to start from scratch. Basically, we'll start with a new project. We'll just do a blank project. I'll call it my new CV. Create that. We'll open up a new project, which will always have this main.txt file, which is good. But we're also going to need a style file. And so if you go to the GitHub repo, go to week 5, there's this file called res.cls, stands for resume.class file. And you can download this file or open it up and copy and paste its contents. But either way, you want to have this file. And then if we go back to our project, I can upload that file from my computer. So I already saved it onto my desktop. Here it is. I'll upload that file. And this is just a file that lays out the style of the LaTeX document that we're trying to build. So it's very technical stuff. You don't need to know what's in it. I don't really know what's in it, to be honest with you. It's not so important. But now what we're going to do is we're also going to go to the GitHub website again. Here's a main.txt file. Let's open that up. Let's copy and paste all of its contents into this main.txt file. And now if we recompile, it will know to look for this res.cls, and our CV will come out over here. So this is just some, sample kind of CV, but you can use this as a template to build your own, and you can, replace with your name and your information, talk about your current positions, past positions. It's got a lot of those sections that I was kind of talking about earlier. And it's totally fine if you don't have, things to fill in for all these sections. These are just examples of things that might go into your CV one day. And then, maybe right now you don't have any teaching experience. That's totally fine. If you're an undergraduate, no one would expect you to have teaching experience at this point. So don't feel like you need to have something for every section. And if you see something or think of a section that's not included on this template that maybe we spoke about a minute ago, feel free to add that. But so yeah, once you've got all this set up, feel free to just start editing this main.txt file. You can start here by changing your name and getting set up with your information. And you're on your way to building your CV, which is something you'll have for your whole academic career. You'll constantly be adding to it, editing it, reformatting. It's something that will follow you your whole academic career. And so with that, that's all I have on CVs. So I'll send it back to Howard.
Thanks, Jack. That was just great. Perfect level, perfect examples and everything. Remember, all those links are available on your on the GitHub page. You can find them there. If you have a question, if you would like to post your CV into Piazza, or perhaps post a link to it on your new website, which we're going to talk about next, we can review that over Piazza. And so that's where you can send your questions, send your request for review. We'll be happy to give you pointers, encourage you to include things that were left out, and encourage you to remove things that don't belong on there. So please use that as a tool that we offer. And next up, we're perfect segue right into personal websites to present your research. And I'm handing that off to Faye, but I'll just lastly say that the main purpose of this is that when You send out your first CV to someone to ask them about doing research, as we heard about in our mentor profiles. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to look at your CV, and the second thing that they're going to do is they're going to search you on the internet. And you want the information of your choice to show up there, and not your photos of spring break or whatever. So with that, I'll hand off to Faye, and he'll give you some pointers about how to get started with your resume.
All right, thanks, Howard. Let's start the presentation. All right, I'm going to talk about how to build your own personal website a bit today. So before talking about the details of how you build your website, let's first look at why do we need a website at all? Well, a personal website, especially a well-written one, is an easy way for your fellow researchers, future employers, to learn more about yourself and your research. And a website is typically more interactive than a CV, and you can include videos, plots, and some background stories about your research. And in fact, in your website, you can be more colloquial compared to the paper you have published or the text in your CV. And this usually appeals to a wider spectrum of audience. And the website is also good for outreach, especially for people who do not work in science, like younger people, like high school students. Sometimes they'll get interested and they'll contact you for research opportunities. So what to include in your personal website? Some of the stuff here will overlap with what Jack just covered, but in your website, you are allowed, or you have the room to expand on these various things. I would say, first of all, you want a clear recent picture of yourself so that if somebody bump into you during a conference, they can recognize you. And you want to include your contact information, email, mailing address, office location, etc. The CV, of course, usually you want to include it at the very top of your website, and maybe in the form of a button where people can click it and they will download your CV. You can include an autobiography. This is a good chance for you to explain your passion for your research. And you can also decorate it with some of your hobbies outside research, but not too much. And you definitely want a list of publications, at least a summary of the number of papers you have written. And you can also include research highlights. For example, you can group your research into different themes, and you can summarize what each of that theme will eventually achieve. We'll take a look at some example later. And if you have given your talk somewhere and recorded it, you can put the recordings on your website. So in science, communication skill is pretty important, and your future employers may want to know how you do on that front. You can also link your personal profiles on research website, for example, Google Scholar, ResearchGate, or even social media. For example, you do science outreach on Twitter, you can also share your account there on your website. So here are some other things people recommend. We'll go through them rather quickly. Profile, of course, something about yourself and what are your expertise, coding experience, what other language you speak, what particular data analysis course you have taken, things like that. And you want to link to all types of publication, including journals, books, conference proceedings, things like that. Current research and research goals. Of course, yeah, you want people to know where you're headed in the future and how your various research can be grouped together in an overarching theme. Your honors and achievements, awards you've gotten during undergrad or grad school. Funding awards, especially relating to telescope time or NASA and NSF funds. Your professional academic affiliation, well, your undergrad, graduate institution, things like that. Teaching and other relevant professional experience, yeah, of course. If you have done teaching, that'll be important and should definitely include it. Forthcoming speaking appearances, yeah, things like conference talks or public outreach talk, you can advertise them here, and people will know when to look for them. Past presentations, videos, photos, basically multimedia form, so that people can understand your research better. Links to your blog, academic social network, yeah, we covered those. Social media widgets, Facebook, Twitter, if you have those. And blog, if you have, well, if you keep a scientific blog about your research. Basic contact info, we covered that. And any other information you deem relevant. So there's no limit to the length of your website, but usually people have a few pages. So how do we actually build a website? There are generally two options. You can check out the commercial ones. For example, Wix is pretty good. It's free. It's easy to use. And they provide a domain and hosting for you. Option number two is to write your own HTML file. This is a lot more flexible compared to Wix. And it's actually easier than you think if you can start with a pretty good template. And this website has a bunch of HTML5 templates. Actually, I used one of them myself. See. And if you decided to go for your own HTML file, you probably need a domain name and hosting service. So usually you can ask your school if they can host your website for you. This is usually affiliated to your department website.
Hey, Faye, can you close your Slack real quick?
Sorry. Somebody's messaging me a lot.
Thanks.
All right.
Apologies for the interruption.
Sure. My bad. Let's see. Where was I? Yeah, you can ask for your for hosting service, probably at your department website or something. Yeah. So the final point is what to do. We actually have your own personal website. I would suggest the first thing we want to do is probably link it in your email signature. I've shown an example here. Like you can just post a link here, and when you send a professional email, this will be appended. And if people are interested, they will just click on the link and they will see your website. You can also share it on social media, Facebook, Twitter, especially if you already have some other professional network friended. And finally, the final point is that you want to update your website periodically so that it's up to date. All right, let's take a look at how we actually write our own website. Here I'm using my own website as an example. So on the left is the homepage for my website, a recent picture of myself, maybe a very short introduction or a welcoming page, just saying who you are, and very briefly what your research is about. And you want to link up your CV here at the very top. And on the right is a corresponding HTML file for that. And personally, I don't know the guts and details of HTML5 coding, but what you can do is identify the region where you should replace with your own information. For example, here, title, you can replace it with your own name, and you can replace the picture with your own. And here at the bottom here, you can put a few navigation pages, for example, home, research, publication, that correspond to this part. Yeah, it's actually easier than you think. Just pick a good template and start playing around with it. Maybe change a few things and compile it. What you actually have to do is just double click on the HTML file, and your browser will render it for you. So you can check before putting it out there if things look correct. So the other way is to go to Wix, sign up for an account. It's totally free, and you can build your own website. Actually, we can take a look in real time. Let's see. Can everybody still see my desktop? Do you see the?
You see the whole desktop. Yeah, Wix is up right now.
Okay. So this is the page, your home page on Wix. And what you can do is click on set up your own website and create new site. And you can choose from a bunch of options. I think the one that's most relevant to us is probably portfolio and CV. And you can edit a template or start your own. Let's try the template today. So here you can see a bunch of different templates. Pick your favorite one. Let's pick this one maybe. Okay, I think it's taking a while to load. Yeah, so this is it. Very much like Microsoft Word. You can click on these various thumbnails, and they allow you to edit website in ways you can do. For example, the pages here, you can like rename the various subpages, resume, project, contact, or you can even add more like here. Yeah, it's very format. And the themes, for example, the background, the color theme, text, you can choose like the font size. Background, you can choose your favorite picture or even upload one. Yeah, feel free to explore around. You discover something very interesting, and everything should be self-explanatory. And when you're done, you just click on publish, and I think you can choose your domain name. Well, with limited flexibility. And once that's done, the page is online, and you can share the link, and people can see it. All right, I think that's pretty much it.
That was great. Thanks, Faye. And I want to emphasize how easy it is for some of these tools to allow you to put your own website online. So Wix, for example, is you saw Faye do it about 15 minutes. You could do it. You get all set up, and then you take another hour to put in all of your details and all your specifics, and you're in really good shape to share that link around with people who can either give you comments, we'll give you comments on it, but again, to put it on your CV and then put it in your email tag, people can find you, and you get to control that, right? You get to control what people see about you, and that's not always true in in a Google search or something like that. You can put and link your LinkedIn page. I know a lot of you have LinkedIn pages. You can put your link both on your LinkedIn page and vice versa, and that'll be really good as well. So yeah, let us know how your websites are going. Give us an opportunity to have a look at them and give some comments on those, and post those on Piazza, and we'll get back to you with some comments. So thanks again, Faye.
Sounds good.
All right, we are now going to transition to our third topic of the day. This is a discussion about imposter syndrome in research settings, and Alex is going to lead that discussion for us. Take it away, Alex.
Awesome, thank you. I'm just gonna go ahead and get my screen going here. All right, so hello everyone. I haven't done my profile yet, but my name is Alex Polanski, and I'm a third-year graduate student at the University of Kansas. And today we're going to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. So what exactly is imposter syndrome? That actually tends to be a hard question to answer. It's not officially recognized by the American Psychiatric Association as an actual disorder, but it is a phenomenon that is experienced by many people in many aspects of life. It's generally described as an individual's doubt in both themselves and their achievements, and a frequent sense of anxiety that they will be exposed for who they think they really are. It was first described by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Eames, who initially thought that it was exclusive to women, but now we know that it affects both men and women alike, and it especially affects underrepresented minorities. It's a strange condition in that it tends to manifest in people who would otherwise be considered pretty high achieving individuals, which is why it's becoming increasingly prevalent in both undergraduate and graduate studies, especially for those in the STEM field. Just to name a few famous people across a diversity of professions that have openly admitted to suffering from imposter syndrome, they include Maya Angelou, Michelle Obama, Sonia Sotomayor, Tom Hanks, and Am Savage. And a little more appropriate for our setting, even Einstein himself had prevailing feelings of self-doubt and was quoted saying, "The exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler, and I wish I could express my own imposter syndrome as eloquently as that." So, are there symptoms of imposter syndrome? Yes, some of these seem to contradict one another, but that's fine. Imposter syndrome can manifest itself in different ways in different people, and individuals can often have a mix of these behaviors. For example, do you over prepare for a project in an effort to distract people from noticing any shortcomings that you might have? Or maybe you do the exact opposite, and the fear of being quote unquote found out makes you put off finishing a project or not even starting a project at all. So a lot of procrastination. The underlying reasoning being that people can't find out you're a fraud if they never see your work, right? Or maybe you downplay your own achievements because you think you got lucky or you don't deserve the opportunities that were afforded to you. Are you afraid that if you talk about your work with another person, that they'll find out that you're not as smart as they thought you were? Or can you think of any negative behavior that you rely on to make excuses when things don't work out? I mean, I'll even go ahead and expose myself. There are things on this list that I know that I do. In my first year of graduate school, I experienced these a lot. I was at a new school halfway across the country, very far away from the support systems that I had built as an undergrad, and starting in a field that I knew pretty much nothing about. And I distinctly remember before meetings with my advisor, I would always have this sense of anxiety and think that this is it. This is the meeting where he would finally find out that I didn't know anything and that he had somehow made some kind of mistake taking me on as a student. Now, all of these are incredibly irrational thoughts, but as I've talked to more and more graduate students and even people outside of science, I've found that these thoughts are anything but rare. And unfortunately, imposterism tends to be chronic. It manifests itself as a cycle that can be pretty hard to break. And it usually begins with some task that ends with some tangible achievement, which induces feelings of fraudulence and anxiety. Much of the time, these feelings can be described as, oh no, this is it. This is when everyone will finally find out that I don't know what I'm doing. And this typically results in two reactions, either over preparation or procrastination. Since the individual is more often than not perfectly capable of the task at hand, there is usually a positive outcome. They're able to complete the task, regardless if they over prepare or if they procrastinate. The project gets finished, the paper is accepted for publication, your advisor approves your work, whatever example you want. But what follows is a sense of relief, but then some false rationalization. The individual will attribute their success not to their own talents or abilities, but to the fact that they either got lucky or they over prepared to the point where no one noticed where they really messed up. And all this does is to create more feelings of self-doubt, and then the cycle unfortunately starts over again. Now, imposter syndrome can actually have a pretty large impact on both your social and your work life, and has been linked to cases of both depression and anxiety. And paradoxically, it doesn't really go away with any more experience or more achievements. In fact, in a lot of cases, without seriously addressing imposterism, accomplishing more tends to make it worse. And if any of this is resonating with you, don't worry, because you're certainly not alone. It's estimated that 70% of people, not just scientists, but the general public, will experience some degree of imposter syndrome in their lives. So what can we do to sort of remove this metaphorical mask? Are there solutions to imposter syndrome? You can find a wealth of ways to deal with imposter syndrome on the internet, and some of them may work for you and others may not. But the important thing is to try some of them out and make an effort to overcome it. A few of the more basic suggestions would be to not dwell on your feelings of self-doubt. If you feel like you can't accomplish a task, try to stop those thoughts and focus on the work at hand. Try to realize that you're a capable individual, but you're not perfect. No one is. Your abilities have gotten you this far, and there's no reason that they can't get you any further. Another one is keeping a journal of positive experiences, and I think this is a really good suggestion, and it's something that I even do from time to time. Writing things down for whatever reason seems to make them more tangible and believable, and if we just keep them in our heads. So collecting these pieces of positive reinforcement in a notebook can serve as a physical object to turn to when imposterism returns in the future. You can use it to prove to yourself that you are a competent person and that you deserve to be where you are. And like I said, I do this from time to time. This is something that my own advisor said to me, a few days ago, and it made me feel good and helped me relieve a few feelings of self-doubt. So it's a very effective way of combating these feelings. And probably the most important part is to pick up allies. So like I said before, most people experience imposterism at some point, and having people to talk with about these feelings make it much easier to get through. I can't tell you how many times I was talking with another graduate student and only barely alluding to my feelings of not belonging. It sparked an entire conversation that revealed that they were going through the exact same thing. I've always come out of those interactions not only with a stronger reassurance in myself, but also a closer connection with another colleague. And so there's a lot more to say about imposter syndrome, and there's tons of other research resources on the internet, but I hope this is a good introduction and you take a little bit from this.
Alex, thank you very much. I really appreciate you covering this topic today. And if I could just say a little bit more about imposter syndrome, I'll just say that, acknowledging that these types of things exist is important. It's part of a larger conversation about mental health, not just in academia, but for everybody. It's important to always have parts of your life that can keep you healthy, right? Getting enough exercise, being active socially, and having a good support network for no matter what type of things come up in life. And these are really important. And sometimes I think as academics, we get bogged down in the importance of spending all of our waking hours trying to solve these problems. But if we you take the night off to relax and go watch a movie with a friend, all those problems that you've been working on will be there the next day. So it's good to have balance in your life. And that's also another way to help combat imposter syndrome. So thank you very much again, Alex, really appreciate it. And stay mentally healthy by taking care of yourselves out there. Okay, so we have a little bit of time left to do a mentor profile. So I have Isaac lined up today. Before I hand off to Isaac, I was going to say, Alex, if you'd like to give your profile today, you're welcome to. You're also welcome to wait until next week if you want to have time to think about it a little more.
I'm going to defer to next week.
Yeah, no problem. Isaac, are you ready?
I'm good. Everyone, so my name is Isaac Malsky. I'm a graduate student at the University of Michigan going into my third year. And yeah, I'll talk a little bit about my life going into astrophysics, how I got here, and hopefully it'll be a little bit helpful. So when I was in high school, I was really into card tricks, and I promise this will be relevant. I was really into card tricks. I got all the way to like performing at like a tiny stage in my local theater. And I was really, really interested in the idea that you could do a sleight of hand, and I personally would know what was going on, but you could fool people and think that like something magical was happening. And I did this for years, and then one day in my high school physics class, I saw the teacher drop a magnet down a copper tube. And what happens when you drop a magnet down is due to Lenz's law, it'll create a magnetic field opposing the magnet and slow it down. So normally you drop a magnet down a tube that's like a meter long, it'll pop out the other end in less than a second. But if you have a really strong neodymium magnet and a copper tube, it will take several seconds for the magnet to fall down. And I was completely enamored by this. I thought it was the most magical thing ever, especially because it's not like a sleight of hand where through a series of like sleights and point of view, the magician is like completely unimpressed by what they're doing, but everyone else is fooled. This was, I thought, the real thing. So yeah, I got really interested in physics. I wanted to know if there was other stuff like Lenz's law that would look like magic to me and to everyone else in the world. So I studied that in undergrad. I was never like the most brilliant student at all, but I had really good colleagues. I had a bunch of friends. I had a ton of support from teachers and professors. Also, my parents are very, very supportive and helped me all throughout undergrad. I definitely don't want to give the impression that everyone who makes it in astrophysics is like does so because of their own like perseverance. I had tons of help, and I still do. I definitely wouldn't be where I am without the support of mentors and friends and parents and stuff like that. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to do pure physics or astronomy or anything like that. But then I started working on a research project in the summer after my second year for Professor U Chicago. She was great and helped me through the process of getting started in astrophysics. And the thing that really drew me to astrophysics was I felt like there were a lot of big unanswered questions that were still going on. Like the field of exoplanets seemed like new and exciting. And a lot of the stuff in physics was more like you can be part of like a $20 billion project at CERN, but it moves over the space of several decades. Whereas astrophysics was like, we're finding a new exoplanet every other day. So I worked for her for a couple years, graduated. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go straight into grad school, so I took a year off to work in industry, just doing coding stuff. I actually missed the deadline to apply for the GRE, for the physics GRE, by one day when I applied the next year. And so I applied to the schools that didn't need the physics GRE. I wasn't super organized, but it worked out. And then so I've started at the University of Michigan, and now I'm working for Emily Rauscher doing 3D computational simulations of hot Jupiter atmospheres. And this is a space I really, really like in astrophysics, of using the new personal computing powers that we have to do physics that wouldn't have been possible 30 years ago. So I think it's kind of amazing that you can use your personal laptop to simulate what is a pretty complicated atmosphere. And, like all of NASA used the computational power of like an iPod to get to the moon. And now I'm running kind of inefficient simulations of different planet atmospheres. So yeah, I'm really enjoying astrophysics. I plan to keep doing research for a couple of years. The community is great. If you have any questions about hot Jupiter computational atmospheres, let me know. I'd be happy to talk.
Thanks, Isaac. That was great. Really appreciate hearing some of your path and some of those details. I'm sure it's going to resonate with some people on the call today. All right. So thank all of you who presented today. Quick preview of next week. We have rate of velocity fitting with Corey. We're going to talk about graduation applications, another soft skill with Alex and Emily. We're going to talk about a SETI paper, so be sure to read that ahead of time. It's a paper that just came out, published no less by an undergraduate who may be a similar experience level as some of you. Keep your questions on Piazza coming. We look forward to seeing your websites and your CVs. And if you have questions that we didn't get to today on the Q&A, please drop them into Piazza. And yeah, it's we talked a little bit about mental health in general today. I'll just end by saying, it's a really important part of everyone's life. Take care of yourself out there. And if you're able, take care of someone you know. That's all for today. Thanks everyone for attending. We'll see you online and we'll see you next week.